Hello, Blake Rudis here with Everyday HDR and HDRinsider.com, and today I want to talk about something that's not so cool, but is really awesome. So what I mean by that is that normally with things like HDR and Photomatix, we do all these really fun things with HDR and show off all these cool features that you can do to make your photos better. But sometimes we don't get into the technical nitty-gritty things about these programs. And what I'm going to show you today is maybe not so much a popular topic, but it's a really awesome topic because it speeds up workflow like no other. It's called batch processing. Basically, the idea behind batch processing is if you have a bunch of images and they all kind of came from the same type of scene. And that's an important thing there because some images, no matter, even if they are shot in the same environment, the scene changes a little bit, so the dynamic range changes a little bit. Now, recently, I was in Colorado on my way to Vegas for Photoshop World. And one of the things that I did was I took a lot of pictures in this place called Colorado National Monument. Now, while I was there, I shot some that were 3 exposures and some that were 7 exposures. So because of that, it's kind of difficult to batch process because you have 3 exposures on one area and then 7 exposures in another area. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to show you how to batch process and how to batch process when you have mixed exposures. So instead of just doing 3 exposures for an HDR, you have 7 exposures for an HDR, and then you're back to 3 exposures because you're bouncing back and forth depending on the scene. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to drag and drop these 3 right here into Photomatix and get started with the merging process for these 3. So that they were taken on a tripod, nothing handheld. We're going to go ahead and align and merge for HDR. Now what I'm doing here is I'm setting myself up with a preset that is going to work pretty well on every single one of the images that was shot during that time period. So what I'm trying to do here is actually, I'm going to go to method defaults and just kind of do my normal settings here. Now when I do stuff in HDR, it's not too dark, not too light, not too stylized. Those are my rules, I guess, for my own tone mapping. So not too dark, not too light, not too stylized. So what I'm doing is up here in the strength and tone compression, details, contrast, I usually hike these all the way up. Saturation, keep it at 50, usually a little bit less than 50. So then the lighting adjustments, that's going to dictate just how much HDR effect I get with this. So I don't want to go all the way down here because these areas are in shadow, obviously, because we have a shadow here. So I want to keep them in shadow and keep that true to life. But I still was able to see into that shadow because I was standing right in front of it. So I was able to see that detail. So I'm going to go ahead and leave it up here with something like this. Now the smooth highlights, most times I'll bring that up to see what happens here in the sky and smooth that area out. Let's bring it down and see what we get there. So I'm going to bring it to about right there at 30. Now my white point, my black point, I usually want to keep at about 0.72. And this is looking at a natural looking HDR image now. So we're not overly HDR. And that's my style. That's how I operate. At this point, I could go into the micro smoothing. If I drop it, I could see what happens. Usually the micro smoothing is going to do the most damage on a natural HDR image. You can see here, it's making a lot of noise up in those clouds areas. So I'm going to bring that up a little bit, up to that 2 mark. I liked where it was there. So I'll leave it there at that default. Don't do anything with the saturation highlights, nothing with the saturation shadows, and keep the shadow smoothness and shadows clippings alone. So basically, what you're looking at is an HDR photograph that's not too dark, not too light, not oversaturated, not over stylized. This will give you a natural looking HDR image. So before I press apply, actually what I'm going to do is I'm going to go down to save this. So I'm going to go up here and press save preset. I'm going to call this CONAT MON. So that's Colorado National Monument for short. It's just a way for me to know that this is the preset that I'm going to be using for the rest of my images. Now I'm not going to press apply. I'm just going to go ahead and close this out. So now, because I've got all these images, I'm talking, I took probably 300, 400 bracketed HDR photographs. I'm not going to do this tutorial on 300 or 400 bracketed photos because that would take forever and you don't need to see that. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to batch bracketed photos. Now, this is obviously something that is kind of intimidating at first when you look at it because a new panel opens up, it looks nothing like the tone mapping, and you immediately say, no, I'm not going to do this. But this will speed up your workflow because once you get this done and you understand batch processing, you can tell Photomatix to batch process all of your images. You can walk upstairs, get a cup of coffee, hang out for a little bit, maybe make some pancakes, come back downstairs, and all of your photos are done. that HDR process is over. So if you do that baseline style HDR where you get everything kind of streamlined and all on their same kind of playing field, then you're good to go. So what you're going to do here is you're going to start from the top and work your way down. That's all you have to do here. It's going to say, for this batch process, what HDR settings do you want to use? So I'm going to go ahead and open up and go down to my presets here, CONATMON, Colorado National Monument. Don't worry about the filter. Custom settings or multiple presets, we don't want to worry about that because what we're going to be doing is just the presets that we had there. Then what you're going to see here is the align images. Just like we see when we initially open up Photomatix, drop our images in for the first time, it's saying, how are these taken? All of these images were taken on a tripod, so I'm just going to leave that one alone. I'm not going to do any ghost removal. I'm not going to do any noise reduction or any intermediate 32-bit files. I don't need that. The next important step down here is in this advanced options. Now you see here it says process 3 images at a time. And this is basically saying the batch will merge 3 files at one time from the source that you have listed below. Now, this is pretty interesting because if we look at, let's go to that source file that I have here. If you see here, let's go ahead and open this up a little bit and make it a little bit bigger so we can see. Here's the little file preview. There's a 0 exposure, -2, +2. Then we move over here. Here's where we have 7. These are 7 total images and then 3. So we have a 3 and then a 7 and then a 3. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to go to select individual files. I'm going to go ahead and grab all those files and then open them. So that's telling Photomatix, these are the ones you want me to work on. Now, if I were to say process 3 images at a time, what would happen is it would take the first 3, it would process them, it would take the second 3, and it would process them. Then it'd take the third 3 and process them. Then we'd have a problem because we'd go from 3, and then we get into that 7 bracket, so the first maybe 2 images might look alright, but they might look like a little weird HDR, but then that one bracket that's missing from that 7 would be added to the end of the other 3, and you get this really nasty ghosting effect. That's where the advanced selection option comes in. Now this came in, I believe, in Photomatix Pro 5, because I don't think I saw this there before. I could be wrong. But if I click on the options here, look what happens now. It says, okay, automatically detect the number of bracketed frames. So now Photomatix is saying, hey, I can look at your EXIF data. If the EXIF data is still on the images, it will look at the EXIF data and know exactly which ones are +1, 0, -1, so on and so forth, so that it can make those brackets all aligned into one photo. So if you look here, the bracketed sets have between 3 and 7 frames. And there's another option here that say bracketed sets may have an even number of frames. I know for my sake that these were a 3, 7, 3. So then here it says the maximum time between 2 successive bracketed frames will be 2 seconds. Basically what that's looking at is trying to look at the EXIF data, see what time the images were taken, and if it has to do some modification based on the maximum amount of time that it can. Alright, so you could say select only part of the frames in the bracketed set, but we don't want to get into that. At this point, all we want to do is have it automatically detect the number of bracketed frames, 3 and 7. So nothing too complex here. Press OK. Now, over here in the destination, we showed the source file. The source file was right here. It was on my desktop. It's set to new folder. I navigated right to it to these images. Okay. So now it says, where do you want to save these to? We could create create them in the source folder, or I like to do what's called a custom location here and then choose a location. So what I'll do is actually go to that new folder. I'll create a new folder in there. Usually it's called bracket or HDR or something, but for the sake of the tutorial, this is test 2. And we'll just go ahead and press OK. Now, I want to save them as 16-bit TIFFs. No JPEGs, just TIFFs. And then I can obviously choose any naming and output options if I wanted to. I'm not going to get into that. All I want to do is run this batch. So when I press the run button, what it's doing is it's saying it's loading 3 images starting at 110. Now it's going to go ahead and align them, and it's merging them. Now it's going to process them with that HDR setting, just like we would if we were in Photomatix doing it ourselves. Then here's the magic. Right here it says loading 7 images starting at image 8144. It automatically knew, looking at my EXIF data, that there was a difference between the 3 brackets in the front, the 7 brackets in the middle, and then after it merges these and processes it with that setting, you're going to see the next batch load, and it's going to magically know that 3 images were in the next bracket. So now it's processed number 3. It's processed our first one. It's processed our second one. Now it says processing CONATMON. So you see how this is working. It's all working really fast. So we went from 3 brackets to 7 brackets to 3 brackets, and Photomatix knew. So if you're on location and you shoot 3 brackets, and then maybe you switch over to 5 brackets, and then maybe you switch over to 7 brackets, Photomatix can automatically detect that within the EXIF data. So as long as you don't delete any of those images or throw a spoke in this whole machine that's happening here, then it will process them just fine. So on this particular shoot, I tested this for the first time. I said, okay, Photomatix, can you handle this? Ran the batch processing on all of my images, all 300 or so, and I was left with about 60 some HDR images between my 3, 7, and 5 brackets that I was doing for that set. So you can see just how powerful this can be when you're trying to make an efficient HDR workflow. Because if you just baseline process them, because you know you're going to bring them into Photoshop or Adobe Camera Raw, Lightroom, so on and so forth, and you're going to do your magic on them, this is going to set you up for a batch process that will have all of these HDR images already done for you. So instead of going through every single one of them, applying the same preset every single time, do yourself a favor and allow yourself to do this. The great thing is it even says here, results are in, and here's the link. You click on it and it takes you right to that folder and shows you the link. Now, if these TIFF images weren't broken, you would see that let's just open up this number 7 one here for Adobe Camera Raw, and we see here that this was a 7 bracketed exposure and nothing is misaligned. It all looks perfect. That's the power of Photomatix when it comes to batching your images. So I'm Blake Rudis with Everyday HDR and HDRinsider.com. And if you like this tutorial, please comment, share, and if you're not a subscriber, go ahead and subscribe because I put tutorials out like this all the time. You can be learning from me when it comes to the HDR process. I also have some books on Amazon.com, Exploring HDR, 11 Things Every Photographer Should Know About HDR Photography, and the DSLR Survival Guide. So you're more than welcome to look those up as well. Thank you very much for your time.